Disclaimer: the content you're about to watch is created for entertainment purposes only. This production has been generated using artificial intelligence software known as NVIDIA. The visuals and narrations in this content are entirely AI generated, while the sound effects have been added by a human. The people and characters depicted in this series are based on individuals known to the creator in real life. However, it is important to note that their personalities have been exaggerated for comedic and entertainment purposes. Any illegal activities portrayed or goofy antics depicted in this series are purely fictional and should not be interpreted as actions representative of the real individuals. These portrayals are not reflective of the actual behaviors or actions of the individuals they are inspired by in real life.
The story opens at the bustling headquarters of the Hero League. Seated around a grand table are the heroes Colton, Zach, Chris, Mr. Dugan, and Mr. Rence, along with the immortal leader of the league, President Carl.
Great job stopping that fridge thief.
Who knew someone would want to steal a fridge? I get it if you're breaking in and taking food. Heck, I do that to Colton all the time. But an entire refrigerator? That's next level.
Some criminals are just odd. But it's still our job to keep the world safe, no matter how bizarre things get.
Speaking of that, you've told us before how you and your brother founded the Hero League back in 1600, but we never got the full story. You always mention how your brother betrayed the League and turned evil, but you've been pretty vague. Can you finally tell us what really happened?
I suppose it's time. You deserve to know the truth. My origin and the League's begin in the year 1600.
The scene shifts, cutting to a flashback of a younger Carl and his twin brother Cory standing beside their parents, unaware of the fate that would change everything. The flashback begins, set in the year 1600. Inside the modest brick home, young Carl and his twin brother Cory sit near the fire, watching their mother prepare supper. Their father, a stern and weathered man, sits at the table, reviewing some papers by the dim candlelight. The air is calm, almost too quiet, as the boys exchange glances, sensing nothing of what's to come. Suddenly, the front door bursts open with a deafening crash. A wild-eyed man storms inside, his face red with anger. His fists clench at his sides and his voice booms through the small room.
You think you can cheat me, do you?
He growls, eyes locked on their father.
You took advantage of me, and I won't stand for it.
Carl and Cory freeze, their eyes darting toward their father, who stands slowly, squaring his shoulders.
I made an honest trade, and you know it. You received exactly what we agreed upon.
That wasn't a trade, that was theft. I gave you something of value, and what did I get in return? Nothing. You ruined me.
Carl feels his heart race as he grips the edge of his chair. Cory looks just as scared, but neither of them knows what to do. Their father doesn't flinch.
Leave my home before things go any further. I don't want this to end badly for either of us.
But the man's face twists with rage, and he pulls a dagger from beneath his coat.
It already has.
He snarls, lunging forward with the weapon. Chaos erupts. Carl and Cory cry out as their father moves to defend himself, grabbing a nearby chair to block the strike. The two men crash together in a brutal fight, grappling and throwing punches, knocking over the table and scattering papers across the floor. The sounds of fists landing and furniture breaking fill the room as their mother tries to shield the boys, tears in her eyes. Carl watches in horror as his father fights desperately, but the stranger is relentless. The man swings wildly, driven by fury, while Carl's father tries to hold him off, struggling to disarm him. A sharp scream breaks through the noise, the sound of the blade finding its mark. Carl's father stumbles backward, a look of shock on his face. His hand goes to his side, where blood begins to pour from a deep wound. He drops to his knees, the life draining from him as the world seems to slow.
Father.
Carl screams, breaking free from his mother's grasp, but it's too late. His father collapses to the floor, his breath shallow, his eyes glazing over. The man, panting and covered in sweat, stands over their father's body for a moment before staggering back. He looks down at what he's done, horror mixing with satisfaction on his face, before turning and fleeing the house without another word. Young Carl and Cory stand huddled together by the fire, the shadow of their father's death still looming large over the small brick home. It's been only days since the violent incident, but the weight of it feels like years. Their mother has not been the same. She moves through the house like a ghost, her face pale, her eyes hollow. Carl watches her now, his heart pounding with a sense of dread he can't shake. She's standing by the table, staring blankly at the window, her hands trembling as she holds a piece of cloth. Something about her silence feels wrong, too heavy, too final.
Mother, are you all right?
She doesn't respond. Her breathing is shallow, her eyes still fixed on nothing. Carl looks to Cory, his brother just as worried.
Mother.
We're still here, we need you.
Their mother finally moves, her hands lowering to the table as she grips the edge. She turns toward them, her eyes filled with sorrow that goes too deep for words.
I can't go on like this.
Carl's stomach tightens.
Don't say that, we need you. We can't lose you too.
But she shakes her head, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks.
I failed you both. I failed your father. I couldn't save him, and I can't save you from this world. It's too cruel.
Carl rushes forward, grabbing her arm.
No, we need you here. You're all we have left.
She pulls away gently, looking down at him with a distant, empty expression.
You'll be better off without me. I can't protect you anymore. I don't know how.
Carl's heart pounds in his chest as she starts moving toward the door, slowly, deliberately. He knows what she's about to do.
No.
Carl cries, running in front of her, blocking the door with his small frame.
You can't do this. Please don't leave us.
Cory joins him, standing at his side, their hands trembling as they try to hold her back.
We'll figure it out. We'll make it through this together. We just need you with us.
But their mother, broken beyond repair, kneels down to their level, her eyes filled with a profound sadness that even a child can't comprehend.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
She gently moves past them, her body trembling as she steps out of the house into the cold night. Carl and Cory run after her, grabbing at her skirts, desperately trying to pull her back, but it's like trying to hold water in their hands.
Don't do this!
Carl shouts, tears streaming down his face.
We need you. We can't be alone.
But no matter what they say, nothing breaks through the wall of grief that has swallowed her. She breaks free from their grasp, walking farther into the darkness. Carl falls to his knees, sobbing as Cory drops beside him, his small hands trembling as he reaches out toward their mother one last time. She disappears into the night, and they never see her again. Back in the present, President Carl's voice is tight as he finishes the story.
That was the last time we saw her. She couldn't take the weight of it. Cory and I were left alone, trying to make sense of a world that had taken everything from us.
The scene transitions back to the flashback, a cold wind sweeping through the small brick home. The fire in the hearth is dying, casting a dim, flickering light over the room. Young Carl and Cory stand in the center of the room, staring at the remnants of their life. The house feels too big now, too empty without their parents. Their father's chair sits askew where it was left during the fight, the table overturned, and their mother's absence hangs in the air like a heavy weight. Carl, still a boy but trying to be brave, moves around the room, gathering what little they have left. A small bag, a few pieces of clothing, a loaf of stale bread. He pauses every now and then, looking at the things that were once part of their family's life, the memories too painful to hold on to now.
We can't stay here.
Carl mutters, more to himself than to Cory. His voice is steady, but there's a tremble beneath the surface. Cory, quieter and more somber, watches his brother pack with wide, uncertain eyes.
Where will we go? We don't know anyone.
Carl sets his jaw, trying to push back the tears that threaten to break through.
It doesn't matter. We'll find a way. We're not staying here, where everything reminds us of them.
Cory hesitates, his fingers tightening around the toy.
But what if we can't make it? What if something happens to us?
Carl stops and turns to face his brother, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination.
We're going to make it. We don't have a choice. We're starting over, Cory. We're going to find a new life, even if we have to do it alone.
They move around the house, packing up what little they can carry. As Carl gathers the last of their things, he pauses by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. His mind drifts to his parents, the father who tried so hard to protect them and the mother who couldn't bear the weight of it all. He looks back at Cory, who stands by the door waiting.
We'll be okay.
Carl whispers to himself, though deep down he isn't sure. He slings the bag over his shoulder and moves to his brother's side. Together, they step outside into the cold night, the house behind them now just a memory of what once was. The wind bites at their faces as they walk away, leaving behind the only home they've ever known. The world stretches out before them, vast and uncertain, but they have each other. As they disappear down the dark, narrow road, Carl clenches his fists, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his small shoulders. He vows in that moment that he will never let anything break them again. From this day forward, they will carve their own path, no matter what it takes. The flashback fades as the image of the two young boys walking into the unknown lingers in the air. President Carl's voice breaks through the scene filled with quiet resolve.
We didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of our journey to becoming something greater. The first steps toward building the Hero League, and the first steps toward the betrayal that would tear it apart.
The story continues, and the flashback resumes as young Carl and Cory wander through the dense forest, their worn shoes crunching over the fallen leaves. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across their path, but the two brothers press on, their small bags slung over their shoulders. They've been walking for days, surviving on what little they could find or forage. Exhaustion weighs heavy on them, but Carl keeps moving, determined to find shelter for the night. Up ahead, Cory notices something strange through the trees, an old, crumbling structure hidden among the thick undergrowth. "Carl," he says, pointing toward the faint outline, "look over there. It's a building, or something." Carl squints, then nods, his curiosity piqued. "Come on, let's check it out." As they push through the dense brush, they come upon what appears to be an ancient temple, its stone walls covered in vines and moss, its entrance partially collapsed from centuries of neglect. Despite its ruinous state, there's something strange and almost magnetic about the place, something that calls to them, even though they don't understand why. "It's so old," Cory whispers, staring up at the massive, weathered stones. "What is this place?" "I don't know," Carl replies, his voice low as he steps cautiously toward the entrance. "But maybe we can find shelter here for the night." Inside, the temple is dark and damp, with only the faintest slivers of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. The air feels ancient, thick with the weight of time. The walls are etched with carvings, figures of warriors, battles long forgotten, symbols of power and protection. Carl and Cory wander deeper into the temple, their footsteps echoing softly off the stone floors. "This place is different," Cory murmurs, running his fingers over one of the carvings. "It feels important." Carl nods. "It feels like it's been here forever." As they explore, they reach a chamber in the heart of the temple. At the center of the room, resting on a pedestal, is a glowing orb. The soft, pulsing light it emits bathes the room in an ethereal glow, casting strange shadows across the ancient walls. The brothers approach the orb, their eyes wide with wonder. There's something powerful about it, something that makes the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. "What is that?" Cory whispers, his voice barely audible. Carl shakes his head. "I don't know, but I think it's why this place feels so alive." They step closer, both drawn to the orb like moths to a flame. As they near it, visions begin to flicker in their minds. Images of ancient warriors, fierce battles fought in a distant time. They see protectors of the earth, men and women who wielded incredible power, standing against forces of darkness to preserve the balance of the world. This temple, they realize, was once a sacred place, a stronghold for these warriors who defended humanity from unimaginable threats. Carl reaches out tentatively, his fingers hovering over the orb. "It's like it's trying to tell us something," he says, his voice barely a whisper. Cory nods, feeling the same strange pull. Maybe it's showing us the past. Without thinking, Carl places his hand on the orb. The moment his skin touches the surface, a surge of energy rushes through his body, and his eyes widen in shock. Cory, following instinct, reaches out as well, and the same power courses through him. The room around them disappears, replaced by a whirlwind of light and sound, as the ancient energy from the orb floods their minds. Suddenly, the visions grow stronger. They see the history of the warriors who once inhabited the temple, how they fought to protect the earth, their sacrifices, and the power they wielded. And then they see something more. The orb, they learn, is not just a relic of the past. It is a source of great power, a conduit for the immortality granted to those who were deemed worthy to defend the world. The power of the orb pulses through Carl and Cory, filling their veins with a burning heat that almost overwhelms them. They cry out, but there's no pain, just a flood of energy, a strange, exhilarating sense of invincibility as their bodies transform in ways they can't yet comprehend. When the light finally fades, Carl and Cory stumble back, gasping for breath. The temple around them is silent once more, but something has changed. Carl looks at his hands, his heart pounding. He feels different, stronger, sharper, like something ancient has awakened inside him. "We're not the same," Cory breathes, clutching his chest as he tries to process what just happened. Carl nods, his mind racing. "I think we've been chosen. The power from the orb. It's in us now." They look at each other, both realizing the enormity of what has just occurred. Somehow, the ancient energy from the temple, from the warriors of old, has been passed on to them. They are no longer ordinary boys. The gift, or perhaps curse, of immortality has been bestowed upon them, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. "We're going to live forever, aren't we?" Cory asks, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of immortality beginning to sink in. Carl, still in awe, stares at the glowing orb one last time. "Yes," he says quietly, "and I think we've been given a purpose, to protect the world, just like the warriors before us." With that, the brothers leave the temple, forever changed. They step back into the world not as the frightened, lost boys they were when they entered, but as something more, something destined to alter the course of history. President Carl leans back in his chair, the weight of his story pressing on him, but there's a glimmer of something else in his eyes now, determination. "That day," he begins, his voice steady and sure, I knew we had been given a gift, one that couldn't be ignored. We weren't just two orphaned boys anymore. We were something more, something bigger. That was the day I realized my destiny. I was meant to become a protector, a hero, and I wasn't going to waste that chance." The group listens intently, the room heavy with the significance of his words. Carl takes a deep breath, preparing to dive back into the memories. The flashback resumes, with Carl and Cory standing outside the ancient temple, the energy from the orb still humming faintly inside them. The weight of their newfound immortality sits on their shoulders, but instead of fear, there's a growing sense of purpose. Carl stares up at the crumbling structure, his fists clenched. "This place," he says, his voice filled with resolve. "This is more than just an old ruin. This is where it all began. The warriors, the protectors of the earth. This is where they defended the world, and now it's where we're going to start something new." Cory, standing beside him, nods slowly. "But what can we do? We're just two kids. How are we supposed to rebuild all of this?" Carl looks over at his brother, his eyes alight with determination. "We've been given this power for a reason. We may not have tools or help, but we have our hands and time. More time than anyone else has ever had." Cory glances at his hands, rough from days of wandering, but he feels the strength within him, the power from the orb. "You're right," he says after a moment. "If we're going to do this, we have to start now. We can't just wander the world forever. We have to make this place into something more, something bigger." The two brothers stand side by side, staring at the decaying temple. They don't have plans or blueprints, just the burning desire to create something lasting. They spend days clearing away debris, breaking down old walls, and scavenging materials from the surrounding woods. With nothing but their bare hands, they begin the work of transforming the temple into something greater, something worthy of the power it once held. It's backbreaking work, and the technology of their time is limited, but Carl and Cory are relentless. They hammer, haul, and shape stone, rebuilding the crumbling structure little by little. They use what they can find: wood, stone, even salvaged metal, creating a blend of old and new. Day after day, they work tirelessly, knowing they have an eternity ahead, but still feeling the urgency to create a home, a base of operations. This will be the start, Carl tells Cory one evening as they sit by the fire they've built in the center of the unfinished main hall. One day this place will be the heart of something greater, a league of heroes who can protect the world the way those ancient warriors did. We'll build it with our own hands, no matter how long it takes. Cory nods, exhaustion in his eyes, but also a spark of hope. And when we're ready, when we finish this place, we'll gather others like us. People who want to protect the world, who want to make a difference. As the years pass, the brothers continue their work. The once ruined temple begins to take shape, with new walls, new rooms, and more modern structures for the time. They add what little technology exists in the 1600s: water channels, rudimentary pulley systems, and defenses that are state-of-the-art for their era. The temple, though still ancient at its core, starts to feel like something more, a place of power, a sanctuary, and a base for the future. "We'll need to find others one day," Carl says to Cory as they stand on the edge of the newly built watchtower, overlooking the vast forest that surrounds their new headquarters. Others who are willing to fight for something bigger than themselves, but for now it's just us. Cory looks at Carl, pride in his eyes. "This is just the beginning, brother. The world has no idea what's coming." Back in the present, President Carl looks around the table, his eyes meeting each of the new heroes he's gathered. "That's how it started," he says quietly, "with nothing but a ruined temple and the belief that we could be something more. It took years, but we rebuilt that place from the ground up. It became our home, and eventually, it became the headquarters of the Hero League." The room is silent, each hero lost in the story of Carl and Cory's relentless determination, their belief in a cause that would outlast them both. Carl's voice softens as he finishes, but the fire in his eyes is unmistakable. "I knew, even then, that we weren't just building a place for us. We were building a place for the future, for heroes like you." The room remains silent for a moment, the weight of Carl's story still hanging in the air. Then Colton, unable to contain his curiosity, speaks up. "So, what happened to the old temple?" he asks, his brow furrowed. "You said you rebuilt it with your own hands, but what about now? What became of it?" "You're sitting in it," he says, glancing around the room. "This place, right here, is that very temple." The group exchanges surprised looks, taking in their surroundings as if seeing them for the first time. The sleek, modern facility they've come to know as the Hero League headquarters, filled with advanced technology and state-of-the-art equipment, feels worlds apart from the ancient ruins Carl and Cory described. "It doesn't look like it used to, I know. But this building, these walls, they're the same ones we started rebuilding centuries ago. Of course, it's been expanded and updated over the years. It doesn't look anything like the temple we first found. Back then, it was just stone, wood, and whatever basic technology existed in the 1600s. He gestures toward the modern panels lining the walls, the control systems glowing with soft blue lights, and the high-tech security cameras that discreetly monitor every corner of the room. Now, it's something completely different. Spy satellites, control panels, a cutting-edge security system. Technology we couldn't have even imagined when we first started. We've adapted, added on, upgraded. But at its core, it's still the same place." Zach's eyes widen as he looks around. "Wait, you're telling me this high-tech place was built on top of a centuries-old temple? How much of the original structure is even left?" "A lot of the original stonework is still there, reinforced and hidden behind the walls, of course. But the foundation we laid back then, the heart of the temple, it's still here." Carl speaks up, his voice filled with nostalgia. "We never wanted to abandon it. That temple meant everything to us. It was the start of our journey. So when we began building the Hero League, we knew it had to be here. We've spent years, centuries even, evolving it into what you see now. We've kept the spirit of the original temple alive, even as the world changed around it. What you see now is the result of over 400 years of growth and adaptation. It's evolved with the times. More technology, more advanced tools to keep the world safe. But at its core, it's still a sanctuary for heroes. The same sanctuary built with our bare hands all those years ago. Colton leans back in his chair, taking it all in, a newfound appreciation for the building he's been training in. "I guess I never thought about it that way," he says, shaking his head. "This place is practically a living piece of history." Chris, who's been quietly absorbing the story, finally speaks up. "It's kind of fitting, isn't it? You started this place with nothing but a dream and a crumbling temple, and now it's the headquarters for heroes across the world. It's more than just a building. It's a legacy." Carl nods, his expression softening. "Exactly. The Hero League wasn't built overnight. It was built on the backs of every hero who came before you and every hero who will come after. This place, this temple, is a reminder of that legacy. It's our responsibility to protect it, to carry it forward." His voice calm but resolute. "We may not have known what we were building back then, but we knew one thing. It was meant for something greater, and now it's up to all of you to continue that legacy." The group falls quiet again, each of them now seeing the room and the Hero League itself in a new light. The old temple, once a ruin, has become something far more than Carl and Cory could have ever imagined when they first wandered into it. Now it stands as the heart of a worldwide force for good, a living testament to the power of belief, determination, and the enduring spirit of heroes. Carl leans back in his chair, a nostalgic smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His eyes glimmer with memory as he speaks, his voice soft yet carrying a weight that draws everyone's attention. "I'll never forget the first hero we ever recruited," he begins. "It was actually your buddy, Mr. Calaway." Zach and Colton exchange glances, surprised. "Mr. Calaway?" Colton repeats, sitting up straighter. "He's immortal too?" Carl nods. "He's the only other person in the Hero League who shares that burden and gift of immortality. The only one aside from Cory and me. And believe it or not, we met entirely by chance. Fate brought us together, and neither of us knew how important that meeting would be at the time." The room is filled with curiosity now, everyone leaning in as Carl's expression turns distant, his mind drifting back to the distant past. The flashback begins, and we are once again in the 1600s, the newly rebuilt temple standing proudly in the clearing, surrounded by the quiet forest. Carl and Cory, still young men, stand at the edge of the clearing, surveying their work. The structure is complete now, strong, sturdy, a fusion of the ancient and the modern, for their time at least. It's not the grand fortress it will one day become, but it's theirs. Carl wipes the sweat from his brow, glancing over at his brother. "We've come a long way," he says, his voice filled with satisfaction. "But if we're going to make this place what we dream it to be, we're going to need help. We can't do it all alone." Cory nods, folding his arms. "We'll find others. We just have to trust that the right people will come along." As if on cue, the brothers hear footsteps approaching from the forest. Instinctively, Carl tenses, his hand moving toward a rudimentary weapon they've crafted. Cory steps forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the tree line. Emerging from the shadows is a man, tall and lean, with dark hair and sharp eyes. He's dressed like a traveler, worn boots and a heavy cloak. But there's something about him, something different. "Who are you?" Carl calls out, his voice wary but not hostile. "What brings you here?" The man stops just before the clearing, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name's Calaway," he says, his tone even and calm. "I mean no harm. I've been wandering for a long time, and I saw this place. It doesn't look like anything I've seen before." Carl exchanges a glance with Cory, who nods subtly. Carl steps forward, still cautious. "This is a sanctuary," he explains. "A place we built to protect the world. But it's not finished, not by a long shot." Calaway's eyes narrow with curiosity, and he takes a step closer, intrigued. "You built this? Just the two of you?" Cory speaks up, his voice steady. "It's not just a building. It's the start of something bigger, a league of sorts, for those who want to protect the world." Calaway seems to consider this for a moment, looking from Carl to Cory and then back at the temple. And you think the world needs protecting? Carl nods. Always. And we're going to need more than just the two of us to do it. We've been gifted with something unnatural, something that's going to keep us alive for a very long time. But if we're going to make this dream a reality, we need others. Calaway smiles faintly, as if he's been waiting for something like this. Fate's a funny thing, he says. I've been wandering for years, searching for something meaningful. And here I am, standing in front of two brothers who seem to have found just that. Carl studies him closely, sensing something in Calaway that goes beyond the surface. You said you've been wandering. What are you looking for? Calaway's smile fades slightly, and he looks past them, toward the horizon. Purpose, he says simply. I've been living a long time, longer than I probably should have. I've been trying to find my way in a world that keeps changing, keeps moving forward without me. And now I've stumbled upon this place. Something tells me this is where I'm meant to be. Carl and Cory exchange a look of surprise. There's something familiar in Calaway's words, a reflection of the uncertainty they themselves once felt after gaining immortality. You're immortal too? Carl asks, his voice quiet but filled with understanding. Calaway nods. I don't know why or how, but I stopped aging long ago, and while the world kept moving, I stayed the same. No one else knew, of course. I've been hiding it, trying to figure out why I was given this curse or gift, depending on how you look at it. Carl steps closer, feeling a connection to this stranger that he hadn't expected. You're not alone anymore, he says quietly. Cory and I, we're the same. We don't know why either, but we do know that we've been given this power for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, it's to protect this world. Calaway looks at Carl, his eyes softening. You're offering me a place in this league of yours? Cory steps forward, nodding. We are, if you're willing to fight for something bigger than yourself. Calaway looks at the temple once more, his heart swelling with the hope he'd long thought lost. I've spent too long fighting alone, he says, his voice steady. If you'll have me, I'm in. Carl extends his hand, a smile spreading across his face. Welcome to the beginning of the Hero League. Calaway clasps Carl's hand firmly, sealing a bond that would last through the ages. Together, they would begin the journey of recruiting others, building the league, and protecting the world from threats yet to come. Back in the present, Carl's voice pulls the group out of the flashback. That's how it all began. Calaway was the first hero we ever recruited. The three of us, Cory, Calaway, and I, became the foundation of the Hero League, and from there, we grew. We found others, built alliances, and slowly the league became what it is today. Zach shakes his head in disbelief. I can't believe Mr. Calaway's been around that long. He never talks about his past. Carl smiles. He's always been a bit of a mystery, even to us. But one thing is for sure, he's as much a part of the league's legacy as anyone else. Without him, we wouldn't have made it as far as we have. Carl's expression shifts to something more reflective, his voice softening as he continues. Mr. Calaway, aside from Cory and me, is the only one left from the original first generation of the Hero League. The others, they fought valiantly throughout their lives. But in the end, they weren't immortal. They aged, retired, and eventually, as all mortals do, they passed away. It was peaceful for most of them, and they left behind legacies of their own. The group listens intently, the weight of Carl's words settling over them. I remember the first generation well, Carl continues, his gaze drifting as if recalling faces and names from long ago. They were some of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. There was Maximilian. He could manipulate fire, bend it to his will. He was a force to be reckoned with in battle, but he had the warmest heart. I still remember how his flames could warm an entire village in the dead of winter. Carl smiles fondly before naming another. Then there was Lydia, whose power over the wind made her unstoppable. She could control the very air we breathe, summon storms with a flick of her wrist. She once saved a fleet of ships from sinking during a massive storm, turned the winds in their favor just like that. But she always had this quiet, gentle nature. She preferred to use her powers to heal rather than to fight. He pauses, his voice tinged with respect. And then there was Darius. He had the ability to see glimpses of the future. A man of few words, but his visions kept us safe more times than I can count. His gift was a burden, though, knowing what might happen, but not always being able to stop it. Still, he carried that weight with grace until the end of his days. Carl looks down for a moment, as if remembering their final moments. They all had extraordinary abilities, powers that shaped the Hero League in its early days. But unlike Cory, Calaway, and me, they weren't meant to live forever. They grew old just like any other hero. They retired, lived out the rest of their lives in peace, and when their time came, they passed away quietly, surrounded by the people they loved. The room falls silent, the weight of the passing years and the history of the League settling over the group like a heavy blanket. Carl's voice becomes quieter, almost reverent. It's strange being left behind, watching the people you built something with grow old while you stay the same. But it's part of what we do. The League is bigger than any one of us. It's an idea, a legacy, passed down from generation to generation. He looks at the young heroes gathered around the table. And now it's your generation. You'll build on what those before you started. You'll keep the world safe, just as we've done. But always remember, even the greatest heroes retire one day. Even those with the most incredible powers will pass the torch when their time comes. Zach shifts in his seat, taking it all in. So, Mr. Calaway's the last one from that original group, other than you and Cory? Carl nods. Yes, he's been with us from the beginning. He fought alongside us in every battle, witnessed the rise of the League, but even though he's immortal, he's watched his friends grow old and fade away, just like I have. Colton leans forward. And you? Do you ever feel the weight of it? Watching everyone else grow old while you stay the same? Carl meets Colton's gaze, a mixture of wisdom and sorrow in his eyes. Every day. Immortality is a gift, yes, but it's also a curse. You carry the memories of every person you've lost, every life that's passed through your hands. But you also get to see the League continue, grow stronger with each new generation, and that makes it all worth it. The room remains silent, each hero now fully understanding the gravity of what Carl, Cory, and Mr. Calaway have endured. They are the last of a generation long past, carrying the torch for those who came before them, while guiding the new generation toward an uncertain but hopeful future.
Carl's expression darkens as the weight of an even deeper, more painful memory comes over him. He leans forward slightly, his voice heavy with emotion. But alas, he begins, there came that fateful day, the day my brother betrayed the Hero League. The room grows tense as the heroes hang on his every word. Mr. Calaway and I couldn't bear the fallout of what happened. Things were peaceful for centuries. About 200 years, in fact, until the conflict between Cory and me in the 1800s. That was when everything changed. Carl's eyes harden as the flashback begins. The year is 1800 and the Hero League has flourished for 2 centuries, maintaining peace and balance in the world. Carl and Cory stand as pillars of the League, leading the next generation of heroes. But in the background, something darker brews, a growing tension between the brothers. The flashback opens in the midst of a heated argument between Carl and Cory. They stand at the edge of a desolate battlefield, the aftermath of a terrible fight. Surrounding them is a crumbling village, the air thick with smoke and the echoes of suffering. But what looms over them both is something far more dangerous, a dark, pulsating entity, a formless creature that hovers in the air, feeding off the despair that has saturated the land. The creature, though terrifying, is not attacking, it simply exists, drawing its strength from the misery of those around it. Its form is shadowy, constantly shifting as if it's a reflection of the collective human suffering in the world. Carl, visibly shaken, stares at the entity with a mixture of fear and empathy. "We have to protect it," he says firmly, turning to his brother. "It didn't ask to be born from suffering. This creature, it's part of the world's pain. If we can understand it, maybe we can help it, and in doing so, help humanity." Cory, however, stands with a different fire in his eyes. He's glaring at the creature, his fists clenched at his sides. "Help it?" he scoffs. "This thing feeds off human misery, Carl. It thrives on suffering. Imagine the power we could wield if we could control it, harness it for ourselves. We could end all conflict in the world if we had that kind of strength at our disposal." Carl's heart sinks, hearing the words he feared would come. "You don't control suffering, Cory. You don't weaponize it. If we do that, we're no better than the forces we've spent centuries fighting." Cory steps closer to the entity, the flicker of ambition bright in his eyes. "You're thinking too small, Carl. This creature holds unimaginable power. If we can harness it, we won't just protect the world, we can reshape it. We can finally force humanity to stop its endless cycle of war and despair." Carl grabs Cory's arm, his voice urgent. "And what happens when you try to control something like that? It will twist you. It will turn you into something unrecognizable. You're playing with forces we barely understand." Cory jerks his arm away, stepping back from Carl. "No, brother," he says, his voice colder now. "I understand this better than you think. You're too afraid to take the risks that could actually change things. That's why we've only ever maintained the status quo. But I won't be shackled by your small-minded ideals anymore." Carl's eyes widen with hurt and disbelief as he watches Cory take another step toward the entity. "You can't be serious. We've fought side by side for centuries. The League was built on the idea that we protect, not control." Cory glances back at Carl, his expression hardening. "That's where you and I differ. I'm tired of waiting for humanity to change on its own. I'll use whatever power I need to make it happen." With that, Cory reaches out and touches the dark entity. The moment his hand makes contact, the air around them shifts violently. A surge of power flows through Cory, and the once shifting form of the entity seems to solidify, its dark energy wrapping around him like a shroud. Cory's body convulses as the entity's power fuses with his own, warping his very essence. Carl watches in horror as his brother is transformed before his eyes. Cory's skin crackles with energy, his body glowing with a sinister plasma-like aura. His eyes, once filled with the same passion as Carl's, are now cold and empty, burning with a cruel intensity. Cory lets out a low, dark laugh, examining his new form. This is the power we need, the power to end suffering by any means necessary. Carl takes a step back, his heart breaking as he realizes the full extent of his brother's transformation. "What have you done, Cory?" Cory turns to face him, no longer the brother Carl once knew. "I've taken control of my destiny, and now I'll take control of this world." Carl's face hardens as he steps forward, his voice steady despite the pain. "Then you leave me no choice." With a sudden burst of energy, the two brothers clash in a violent fight. Carl tries to reason with Cory, but his brother, now calling himself Plasma Man, wields his new power with ruthless efficiency, blasting waves of destructive plasma that tear through the ground and the surrounding ruins. The battle is fierce, the world around them crumbling as their powers collide. Carl holds back, desperate not to hurt his brother, but Plasma Man fights without mercy, driven by a newfound ambition to bend the world to his will. The entity, still pulsing with dark energy, watches silently as the brothers tear each other apart. But even as Carl fights, he knows that this isn't just a battle between siblings, it's the end of the Hero League, as he knew it. Cory's betrayal would mark a turning point in their lives, a rift that could never be repaired. Back in the present, Carl's voice is heavy with sorrow as the flashback fades. "That was the day my brother became Plasma Man. He left the League, and in doing so, he shattered everything we had built together. Mr. Calaway and I, we couldn't bear the fallout. The League was never the same after that. The trust, the unity, it was all broken." The room falls into a deep, contemplative silence as the heroes try to process the magnitude of Carl's words. Cory, once a founding member of the League, had become its greatest threat. Carl looks up at the young heroes, his voice filled with a quiet, painful resolve. And now, after all these years, my brother's shadow still looms over the League. The conflict between us is far from over. Carl takes a deep breath, as though the weight of his brother's betrayal still presses on his shoulders after all these years. His eyes darken with a resolve that's unshakable. Now, all I can hope for, he says, his voice low, is to eventually put an end to my brother's evil once and for all. I've been preparing for that moment for a long time. The group leans in closer, captivated by Carl's next words. He pauses, looking around the room at each of them, as if weighing the burden he's about to share. In the basement of the Hero League headquarters, he continues, I've been constructing something. Something that I hope will one day hold Cory, Plasma Man, forever. A prison, strong enough to contain him, to prevent him from wreaking any more havoc on the world. I've put decades into designing it, making sure it's impenetrable. Because having Cory out there roaming free as Plasma Man is too dangerous, not just for us, but for the entire world. The young heroes look at each other, stunned into silence. The thought of a prison hidden beneath their feet, built specifically to contain an immortal being as powerful as Plasma Man, shakes them to the core. But Carl isn't finished. His eyes harden as he continues, his voice filled with a quiet sense of dread. And it's not just Cory I'm worried about anymore. He has a son now, Plasma Boy. As if my brother wasn't enough of a threat, there's the possibility that his son could follow in his footsteps, become just as dangerous, if not more. I don't know how far the boy's powers will develop, but he's already dangerous and he's loyal to his father. That makes him a threat to all of us. The room is heavy with tension as the heroes absorb Carl's words. They've trained for battles, faced enemies, but this is a whole new level of danger. Zach is the first to speak, his voice quiet but filled with awe. You've been planning all of this for years? Carl nods. Every day since the day Cory became Plasma Man, I've known it would come to this. I don't want to fight my brother, but I don't have a choice. His ambitions, his thirst for power, they've only grown over the centuries. I can't let him keep feeding off the world's suffering. And now, with his son involved, it's only a matter of time before they strike again. The group is silent for a moment, each of them processing the gravity of what Carl has just revealed. They've always known about the Hero League's fight to protect the world, but this is a family war, centuries in the making, with consequences that could unravel everything. Carl stands, his body suddenly feeling the weariness of years. That's the whole story, he says, his voice calm but tired. That's what we've been facing and what we continue to face. I'll keep fighting and I'll keep protecting the League. But now you know the truth and why I need all of you to be ready. Because one day I'm going to need your help to bring Cory in. And when that day comes, we can't afford to lose. He pauses, looking at each of them in turn. Any more questions before I leave you to it? The room is still, the young heroes too stunned to speak at first. Colton finally opens his mouth, but before he can say anything, Carl waves a hand and smiles faintly. I'm going to take a shower. I think I've earned it after all that reminiscing. With that, Carl walks out of the room, leaving the group to sit in stunned silence. Each of them knows that things have changed. The story of the Hero League, its history, its battles and its future now feels more real and more dangerous than ever before.